Some moments in life don't just happen. They arrive. They interrupt you like a forgotten melody you suddenly remember. A moment when time slows, breath catches, and everything familiar seems to pause. It feels like the universe has stopped just long enough for you to notice that something sacred is unfolding. If you've ever met someone and felt like you were being introduced to something ancient, not new, you're not alone. Many of us have. And that feeling, that deep, inexplicable knowing, it's not just a romantic fantasy, it's a kind of spiritual memory. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the Psyphos Depth channel and join our growing community of seekers, dreamers, and souls in search of something more. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt this kind of connection before? That soul-deep recognition that defies logic? I'd love to hear your story. Carl Jung believed that the meeting of two souls is not accidental. He wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. And in that transformation, something divine is at work. It's as if the universe, maybe even God, conspires behind the scenes to bring two people together, not just to love, but to awaken. But this awakening rarely arrives the way we expect. See, we're conditioned to chase comfort, ease, predictability. But the soul? The soul craves something else entirely. The soul longs not for a warm body, but for recognition, for expansion, for truth. And when the divine decides it's time, it doesn't just hand you a soulmate wrapped in a bow. It shakes you. It places a mirror in front of you in the form of another person, not to flatter your ego, but to undress it. That mirror won't just reflect your beauty. It will show you your shadows, your fears, your unfinished stories. And that's the first sign this isn't just another connection. When God intends for two people to meet, He doesn't simply orchestrate circumstances. He awakens echoes, ancient echoes within them. You'll feel it as a pull before you see it clearly, like a whisper you can't translate but feel in your bones, a longing that's hard to describe. Not desperation, but a quiet urgency, a sense that someone, somewhere, is meant to find you. But here's where most people get confused. They think that soulmate love will feel effortless. They think it will be a soft landing. But often, it starts with resistance. When the real thing comes, your ego might panic. You might feel triggered, unsteady, even scared. Because deep down, some part of you knows this person is going to change everything. And that's not a romantic idea. It's a spiritual truth. Soulmate connections often begin in chaos because something within you must die to make space for what is being born. Jung warned us, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. And if you've experienced it, you know what I mean. That moment when love no longer feels safe, but sacred. That moment when you realize this isn't just someone to love. This is someone who sees you. And here's the truth. Being seen is terrifying, especially when you've spent your whole life trying to be acceptable, polished, put together. But a true soulmate doesn't care about your presentation. They sense your essence. They speak to the parts of you you've hidden, even from yourself. You'll feel naked in front of them, and somehow, free. This isn't infatuation. It's not lust. It's not a checklist of compatibility. It's recognition. And recognition feels more like remembering than discovering. You look into their eyes, and it doesn't feel like, who are you? It feels like, oh, it's you. It's the collapse of time, the dissolve of logic. You might even feel like your body arrived last, but your soul was already waiting. And yet, many people run from this. I've seen it. I've even felt it myself. When something this powerful arrives, the instinct isn't always to surrender. Sometimes it's to retreat, because we're not used to being loved at a soul level. We're used to being chosen for our roles, our appearance, our usefulness. But when someone chooses your soul without asking it to perform, you panic. Because it demands authenticity. There's no hiding anymore, no pretending, no performing. And for some of us, that's the most terrifying intimacy there is. But it's also the most healing. Because in that kind of relationship, your wounds don't get ignored. They get witnessed, not to be fixed, but to be understood. That's the difference between a karmic partner and a divine soulmate. A divine relationship reveals the lesson, and that revelation, it frees you. You stop running from yourself. You stop bargaining for love. You stop shrinking just to be chosen. Because suddenly you realize, I was never too much. I was just too much for the wrong mirror. Jung believed the soul carries within it an image of the other, the anima in a man, the animus in a woman. This internal blueprint is what magnetizes us towards someone who mirrors that archetype. But here's where it gets tricky. If we're not spiritually mature, we can fall for the image, not the person. Projection feels like love, but it's just longing wearing a mask. And that's why God will often allow the illusion to shatter, because He wants you to love what is real. Real love doesn't idolize you. It awakens you. And that awakening? It's not always poetic. Sometimes it's messy, uncomfortable, even painful, but it's never destructive. It burns away illusion so that only truth remains. I believe that's why soulmate love arrives when we least expect it, when we're no longer grasping, controlling, or begging the universe for a partner. It arrives when we've begun to enjoy our solitude, when our loneliness has taught us how to listen to ourselves, when we've stopped performing for attention and started healing for alignment. This is divine timing, not romantic urgency. And when that moment comes, it doesn't knock loudly. It enters quietly. You may meet them in a grocery store, or in a random conversation, maybe even online. And yet, the ordinary context doesn't matter. Because the energy is undeniable. It hums in your bones. You feel peaceful and charged, still and electrified, familiar and completely new. And that's when you know something sacred is unfolding. What makes this kind of connection so profound isn't just the love itself. It's the recognition of who you become in its presence. You begin to notice that you're not reaching for validation in the same way. You're not clinging or chasing or molding yourself to be accepted. Instead, you find yourself expanding, opening, becoming more you than you've ever allowed yourself to be. And not because the other person completes you, but because they reflect you, clearly, honestly, unflinchingly. It's no longer about whether this person fits your expectations or checks your boxes. That all fades into irrelevance. What matters now is how they activate you, not in a triggered, defensive way, but in a deeply awakening one. Their presence calls parts of you forward that you didn't even know were asleep. Dreams you tucked away, truths you've silenced, courage you've buried under years of people-pleasing and survival. And you watch yourself unfold, not because you have to, but because you want to. And they're doing the same. Because divine connections aren't one-sided. They evolve in harmony. They challenge both people to rise, to be seen, to strip away the armor. There's no savior, no pedestal. Just two souls learning to meet each other as they are, and still choosing to stay. But this isn't to say it's easy. In fact, it can feel anything but. You'll still encounter conflict, still feel vulnerable, still get scared. But the difference is, this time, you stay, you talk, you face it together. You don't shut down at the first sign of friction, because deep down, you know the friction isn't a threat, it's a signal. A flare that something within needs attention, love, healing. And when you meet someone who sees that, really sees it, and doesn't walk away, it rewrites something ancient inside you. Because many of us grew up with the idea that love is conditional, that love must be earned, that love will leave when we're too much or not enough. But real love, the kind Jung hinted at, the kind rooted in divine design, doesn't abandon you when you're messy. It leans in. It listens harder. It holds your trembling hands and says, "I'm still here." And sometimes, that kind of love arrives after the heartbreaks, after the betrayals, after the seasons where you begged for something that never came. You needed those chapters, even if they tore you apart, because they softened you, refined you. They helped you understand what not to accept, so that when this true resonance arrived, you'd recognize it, and you'd be ready. Because let's be real, if it had come earlier, you might not have been able to hold it. You might have sabotaged it, projected old wounds onto it, or tried to squeeze it into an old, outdated version of yourself. But now you've shed enough of your old skin to see clearly, to feel without flinching, to receive without guilt. And let me just say, that's no small thing. To receive love without flinching is revolutionary, because many of us are used to being hyper-independent, used to giving, fixing, showing up for others while ignoring our own needs. We're trained to believe that vulnerability equals weakness, that needing someone makes us less. But with a soulmate connection, needing isn't a deficiency, it's a bridge, a sacred exchange. You meet in your wholeness, not your lack. You support, not save. You inspire, not fix. And when you love from that place, the relationship becomes a force of growth, not a refuge from pain, but a canvas for truth. A space where both people are safe enough to unravel, to rebuild, to evolve. And here's something I personally believe. The most divine partnerships aren't about creating a perfect love story. They're about co-creating a container where both souls feel free to become their most truthful selves. That's why when God brings two soulmates together, it's not just for romance, it's for purpose. Together, you might build a family, or a movement, or a quiet, intentional life that radiates light simply by existing. You might trigger each other into deep healing, or call each other into creative brilliance. You might challenge the world's definition of success and build something entirely your own. Whatever it looks like, it won't be ordinary. Because you aren't ordinary, and neither is the connection. This is sacred geometry in motion, divine orchestration disguised as chance. And once you've tasted that level of resonance, you'll never settle for less again. Not out of arrogance, but reverence. Reverence for what it feels like to be met, to be mirrored without distortion, to be chosen without masks. So if you're still waiting for this, don't lose heart. Don't fall for the illusion that you're asking for too much. You're not. You're just finally ready for something real. Something that doesn't need to be chased or forced. Something that arrives and stays. And when it does, you won't have to question it, because your soul will remember. And yet, remembering isn't always immediate. Sometimes the recognition comes in waves. At first, it's a feeling, a subtle familiarity in their voice, their laugh, their silence. And then it builds. The way they listen, the way they notice the things you never had to say. The way they look at you like you're already whole, not because of what you offer, but because of who you are when no one's watching. That kind of remembrance doesn't require a resume of compatibility. It bypasses logic. It doesn't need a list of mutual hobbies or a shared Spotify playlist. It just is. And you find yourself saying things like, "I don't know why, but I trust you." Or, "This feels like something I've waited lifetimes for." Some people will laugh at that, dismiss it, call it woo-woo or irrational. But if you've ever felt it, you know how real it is. More real than anything that came before it. Because it doesn't come from the mind, it comes from the body, from the soul, from that quiet, sacred place inside that's never been fooled. And when someone touches that place, you don't forget it. Ever. Even if the relationship changes, even if it doesn't look the way you expected, even if the connection forces you to evolve in painful ways. Because soulmates don't always come to stay. Sometimes they come to wake you up. Sometimes they arrive to open a door you've been terrified to approach alone. To hold a mirror to your heart and say, "This is what's possible. This is who you could be if you stop hiding." And I know that's not what people want to hear. We want soulmates to stay forever, to marry us, to grow old with us on porches and in photographs. But the soul doesn't work by fairy tale timelines. It works by lessons, by divine unfolding. And sometimes, the most sacred thing a soulmate can do is leave, not out of betrayal, but completion. Because their role was never to fill you, it was to ignite you, to pull you into alignment with who you were born to be. And after that, your path might diverge. You might mourn them like a death. And yet, you'll feel more alive than ever. Because they left you with something eternal, a knowing, a flame, a memory that doesn't burn you, but guides you. And if you're lucky, if you're truly blessed, your soulmate will stay. Not because they have to, but because they choose to again and again. They choose you, not the version of you that fits a mold, but the one that keeps breaking and rebuilding. They hold space for your darkness without shrinking your light. They call you out with love and call you back with grace. They see your rawness and remain unshaken, and you do the same for them. Because in a divine partnership, love is not a contract. It's a practice, a ritual, a choosing, every single day. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Because that's what makes it sacred. It's not that you never fight. It's that you fight for each other. It's not that you always agree. It's that you honor the differences. It's not that you never get afraid. It's that you face the fear together. That's when love becomes more than romance. It becomes a revelation, a place where truth is not punished, but welcomed, where vulnerability isn't a risk, it's a requirement, where growth isn't optional, it's inevitable. And here's the paradox no one tells you. When you find this kind of connection, it doesn't make life easier. It makes it realer. You no longer have the luxury of pretending. You're seen too deeply for that. And strangely, that becomes your freedom. Because now you can stop performing. Now you can stop competing. Now you can stop earning love. You can just be. And in that being, something extraordinary unfolds. You begin to heal in places you didn't know were broken. You begin to trust in ways you didn't know were possible. You begin to love, not from fear or fantasy, but from a deep, grounded knowing that this is holy. So whether your soulmate is already beside you, still on their way, or watching you from across the veil of time, I want you to remember this. You are not too much. You are not hard to love. You are not unworthy of deep, soulful connection. You are just waiting for the right mirror. And when it comes, you'll know. Not because it's perfect, but because it's true. And when that truth finally arrives, it doesn't demand explanation. It doesn't need to be rationalized or justified. It just lives, quietly, unapologetically, in your chest. It hums beneath your conversations, your shared glances, your silences. You begin to sense that the sacred doesn't need to be loud to be real. In fact, the most divine connections speak the softest. They whisper instead of shout. They show instead of prove. They stay instead of beg. That's when you understand what people mean when they say, "The soul knows." The soul doesn't measure love by flowers, texts, or promises. It measures love by presence, by attention, by the sacred commitment to growth, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Because that's where love stops being an emotion and becomes a choice. And let me tell you something from the deepest place in my heart. When you've been misunderstood for most of your life, when your sensitivity has felt like a burden, when your silence has been mistaken for indifference, it is transformative to be met by someone who gets it, who doesn't just tolerate your quiet, but cherishes it, who doesn't fear your depths, but dives into them with you. You begin to unlearn all the false things you believed about love. You stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. You stop confusing attention for devotion. You stop settling for relationships where you have to abandon yourself to be accepted. Because now, you've tasted truth. And it's nothing like the world described. It's slower, deeper. It's the kind of love that lets you exhale, that doesn't rush your healing or minimize your shadows. It holds them with care, with reverence, not to fix you, but to walk with you. And that walking, that shared journey, that's the soul's curriculum. Because in the end, a divine connection is never about possession. It's about partnership. It's not about control. It's about communion. It's not about completing each other. It's about awakening what was always within. And as you walk this path, you may notice your vision changing, your goals, your desires, your values. You're not just evolving alone now. You're evolving together. But don't get this wrong. It's still your journey. You're still responsible for your growth, your boundaries, your healing. And so are they. The relationship simply becomes the space where both of your individual transformations are witnessed and supported. It becomes a mirror, not a bandage, a forge, not a fantasy. It asks more of you, but gives more in return. Because nothing catalyzes personal evolution like being truly seen by someone you trust. Someone who doesn't flinch when your pain rises. Someone who meets your tenderness with steadiness. Someone who says, "You don't have to hide here." And you believe them. Not because they said it, but because they've shown it. Over and over again. With presence, with patience, with the quiet kind of love that doesn't make grand declarations, but lives in the day-to-day. The morning coffees, the difficult talks, the subtle way their eyes soften when you speak your truth. That's the kind of love that changes people, that teaches them they are safe, not just in someone else's arms, but in their own skin. Because when love becomes a sanctuary, it rewrites every narrative you've carried. You stop viewing yourself as someone to be tolerated. You start viewing yourself as someone to be cherished. You don't just attract love, you become it. Not in a codependent way, but in the most sovereign, soul-rooted way imaginable. You begin to move differently, Speak more clearly. Say no more easily. You know your value now. You honor your intuition. You recognize red flags not as puzzles to solve, but as reasons to walk away. You stop negotiating your worth for companionship, because now you've seen what's possible, and you won't go back to less. Not because you're bitter, but because you're clear, and clarity is one of the most divine gifts love can give. It's not always easy. It requires courage. But it's the kind of clarity that holds you steady through the storms, that reminds you who you are when everything else gets loud, that says, you are not crazy for wanting depth. You are just ready. And readiness? It opens doors. It aligns timelines. It changes everything. Because when you're ready, the universe responds. Not always immediately, but inevitably. Because God doesn't forget what He's woven into your soul. And when He brings someone to meet you there, it's not luck, it's design. And in that design, you'll find not just romance, but reverence.